What's going on, guys? My name is Randall. I create videos on painting shoes and painting a bunch of other things. If you like what you just saw, feel free to like and subscribe below. I promise you won't regret it. Today, I'm just going to go over a quick tutorial on how to paint these CDG Comme des Garçons CDG customs. Pretty straightforward. You can pretty much do it in whatever color you want. The client I painted these for, he wanted red on the outside and blue on the inside, but I'll only be showing you the red side. But there's a couple things I want to go over real fast. First off, I use an airbrush in this tutorial. You can just use a paintbrush if you have that. A lot less tape, a lot less prep work, and most people probably don't have an airbrush. Second off, I use a vinyl cutter to cut out the heart. You can just do the same thing with a piece of tape and tracing it, or a piece of paper and then taping it on. Works the same way. The good thing about this logo is that it's not super sharp or crispy or anything like that, so the heart and eyes and everything don't have to be perfect because that's not really how it's supposed to be like. Feel free to subscribe below if you like this kind of content, and let's hop right into it. Let's go. Okay, so the materials needed for this paint job. I'm using some acrylic paint that is white, red, and black. Also using some too thin to thin out the paint for my airbrush. If you're only using a paintbrush, you don't need that. Feel free to comment saying, "Hey Randall, I'm gonna use a paintbrush," and I'll just respond with like kissy face or something. Next, for all your normal people out there, use some paintbrushes to paint. For those of you who haven't seen an airbrush, this is what an airbrush looks like. You also need vinyl or paper or tape for your stencil. You could also freehand it if you want, but I don't have the cojones for that. If you are using vinyl, I do recommend transfer paper. If you don't know what these materials are, I'll have links down below to check them out on Amazon. For the fine detail work, I like to use toothpicks, but I ran out of toothpicks, so I'm using floss with the pointy end. But honestly, anything with a small, fine shaft will do the trick. You also need scissors or a knife to cut out your stencil. Lastly, a blow dryer will help speed up the drying process, and that's about it. Okay, so for making your stencil, like I said, I have a vinyl printer, so I already had it cut out. But if you don't have one, what you can do is take a piece of paper, pull up a picture of the CDG logo, or whatever you want to paint for that matter. Bring it up on your screen, crop it to whatever size you want, press trace over it, and just cut it out. And then what you want left is the outside of the heart. We'll be putting that on the shoe, and then you'll be painting the inside of that heart to fill it out. Now you just take your stencil and put it wherever you want on the shoe. When you use vinyl, it is sticky on the other side, but with paper, it's not. So what you can do is just put it on there and then just tape around the stencil, just around the edges, so the stencil doesn't move while you start painting. Also, the heart that you did cut out, make sure you keep that. You will need to cut out the eyes to put them on after you paint it, so you can paint around those eyes so you can have nice, clean eyes. If you are using vinyl, one tip that does help is using a hair dryer on the vinyl just to make sure that it adheres to the shoe correctly. Don't do it too long as it might mess up the vinyl, so just do it for a little bit just to make sure it sticks. Since I'm using an airbrush, what I'm doing is just taping off the rest of the shoe just to make sure that I don't spray any paint on it, and that way paint only gets inside that little heart there. So now that it's all prepped, it's time to start painting. So in this, I'm using an airbrush, just spraying inside of the stencil. If you're using a paintbrush, you want to do the same thing. One thing I do want to say is that it will take multiple coats of white, especially on a black surface like this, just to make sure that you get a nice clean white as an underbase. The reason why you do want that is because if you put red directly on black, it'll kind of come out kind of flat. So having that white as a base makes the red pop a little bit more. For this part, make sure you don't rush it, as this will take time. Just make sure nice, thin, easy layers. You could blow dry it in between just to speed it up a little bit, but just make sure that this is something that you don't rush. If you are paintbrushing, I do recommend going from outside the stencil to inside, because if you go in to out, there's a good chance that the paint will get under the stencil and will let it bleed, and then it'll just be a lot of cover-up work at the end. So go from the out in instead of the in out. And this is what it looks like around 4 or 5 coats in of white. Now you're going to take the heart that you cut out, or you can use a brand new sheet of paper, and you're going to trace and cut out the eyes, so that way you end up with 2 separate eyes that you're going to put on your shoe. If you have vinyl like this, you just peel it off so the 2 eyes are left. Next, you're going to take your transfer paper and slap it onto those eyes, and then once you press all over it, you're going to peel it up and the eyes will be on the transfer paper. Now right here, I just take the transfer paper line up the eyes where I want them, and stick them on there. One thing that I didn't do is you can take a hairdryer and blow it on there just so that the vinyl sticks to the shoe easier. I forgot to do this, but it definitely helps. This is a step that's going to be different if you're using a paintbrush, just because that you can't tape your eyes onto the shoe. And I'll go into a workaround for this in the next step. So if you're using an airbrush, it's pretty straightforward. You first clean out your airbrush from the white and put in the red paint. And you do the same thing as the first paint step. You just do probably 2 to 3 coats for this red paint as it is darker. If you're using a piece of paper for a stencil, what you want to do is hold down one side of the eye with your finger and paint the other side over the stencil. That way you have one side of the eye done, and then you can just hold the other side of the eye down and paint over that. That way you'll have a nice outline of the eyes on the logo. And then once you do that, you can just fill in the rest with your paintbrush a lot easier. From there, you already have an outline of the eyes, so you can just take off the eyes and then just paint outside the eyes. Since you are using a paintbrush, it's very controllable, so you can just make sure that you don't get in the eyes. If you do use an airbrush, I would just take your knife and just slowly peel off the stencil. This is pretty satisfying, especially if it's very clean. Unfortunately, in my circumstance, it bled a little bit, but if you do look in the logo, the eyes do bleed a little bit, but it is something you want to do just to clean up, because it looks like this logo has smoked weed for the past 3 hours or so. Now onto the eyes. So I do have fine paintbrushes. For fine details, I rather use a toothpick just because it's way more controllable and it has a very, very fine point. So you could get very, very close to the edges, and you can keep it as clean as you want it to be. Of course, for these eyes, they are very much not circles, so mistakes are okay with this, but you still don't want to get carried away. And if you're not comfortable with a fine paintbrush, I would definitely recommend using a toothpick or something similar like this floss I'm using. But for the eyes, one coat will most likely be okay. This is just something you're gonna have to feel out and just get the look that you do want. And on this part, I'm just taking another toothpick and taking white paint and just cleaning up the eyes a little bit, just to make sure that this logo doesn't look like it 420 blazed it all freaking day. From here, this is the time to take off your stencil. Pretty straightforward. You just take it off, and see when I'm pulling this off, the white did bleed a little bit, just because when I mixed my paint for my airbrush, I put a little bit too much too thin in. So for me, it's time for more detail work. I do the same thing, just take the toothpick with the black paint, and this is what the final product looks like. So that's the end of the tutorial. Like I showed you before, this is how it turned out. If you do this on like Air Force One, which is leather, there might be a little bit more prep work needed. But if you have any questions, comment down below. I'll be answering all of them, so if you have any questions. Also, at any time during this video, if you're thinking like, that Randall guy, he seems to be like a nice lad, hit that subscribe button down below. I'll love you forever. Also, feel free to follow my Instagram and TikTok. It's all RanDZ13. If you don't have all the materials though, I have links down in the description if you want to pick those up. But yeah, that's it for this one. Hope you guys have a nice day. Stay safe. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.